Colleagues, friends, welcome back to the final session of our second day of the joint Urban Design Group Academy of Urbanism Symposium. You've probably heard me speak too many times today, so I'm going to be very brief. Our last session is on the subject of co-creation and design in the Middle East and will be chaired by my good friend and colleague, Husam Al Waer. Husam will be introducing the speakers. So I hope you're all enjoying this joint event. I certainly know I am. And I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Katja, who will introduce, who will speak on behalf of the Urban Design Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I don't really have a lot to say. I mean, you know who I am, and I just want to say welcome from the Urban Design Group as well, and great to see so many people again this evening, and well, enjoy this fantastic session. It looks amazingly interesting, and I really look forward to hear all the speakers and to Sam. Have a good evening. Bye.
Shall I start? Very good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for the invitation. Before I start, I would like to thank colleagues in Urban Design Group, the Academy of Urbanism, chairs, directors, and all staff who help to make this session a reality. This is really highly appreciated. Plus, a warm welcome to our great speakers, international speakers, Kilian, I could say the former mayor of Zaatari camp, who was the man behind the camp itself and the achievement, and also Professor Karen from Washington University. She has done over the last 5 years a great job in the camp itself on issue of learning education, but co-design with more than 2,000, how can I say, children in the camp itself. And I really look forward to hearing from them. Before we start with our talks and the first speakers, Kilian, as you know, if you look at the Middle East over the last 20 years especially, from, let us put it this way, Western perspective, if you look at the press, the media, it's all about, either all the time about violence, explosion, revolution, bombing, injustice. So it's all about sad story, sad news. I thought I would like to do a little show today. I recorded a video, and can we put the video on, but just could you please pause it? I just would like to introduce the story behind this video. It's only 6 minutes. It has, the video itself has graphics drawn by a very famous Lebanese American artist, plus a nice poetry in English, as well by a colleagues in Lebanon. His name is Roni. So just to make it very clear, the copyright is for both of them. But I managed to put them together because, guys, at the end of the day, people in the Middle East, like anyone, like any human, we like life, we like family. So I just would like to give a different perspective about our Middle East and our old civilization. It's about for 7 minutes. I call it a story from the East. It is a story from the East. It's not a particular city. So it's an A story. It's not a city from any specific country. It is only a story from one city in the Middle East. One things I would really appreciate of the participant, show us just if they put beside their names in Zoom where they are from, because I am well aware there are a lot of people from Middle East, from United States, Europe, and the UK. So 6-7 minutes, and then we will move into the first speaker, Mr. Kilian, and I hope you will enjoy it. Once upon a time, in the Middle East, there was a beautiful city where people enjoying simple and peaceful life. Everything was a cause for celebration. Members of the family, neighbors, and friends participated in all activities taking place in public. Long time before cinemas, there was Sandouk Al-Firji, the show books that entertained children in the piazza of the city. In the morning time, women would gather around a water fountain to begin a coffee ritual and daily gossip session. In the market, the milker chanted about his fresh milk while milking one of his goats right there. The walk to the fountain had become over time an anticipated special event where women would show off their beautiful dresses. In the piazza, the musical band assembled swords and dabki dancers. Young men would try to impress young ladies. After the wedding ceremony, the bridal procession proceed to the groom's house with the musicians, dancers, relatives, and neighbors. In religious ceremony, parents and children made a procession where children hold lighted candles. At the end of the summer, women would gather in the souk to crush the grapes and strain the juice to make molasses. In particular occasion, we would hear the beat of drum and song of juggling, a performing peer and dancing monkey. Then came the Arab Spring. Protesters occupied the piazza and streets of their city and started a revolution calling for demonstrations. The call for freedom, dignity, and justice were answered through shells and rockets over the head of frightened people. Many were obliged to leave to another city where they settled in tent and have appropriated the place, trying to copy and imitate their beloved city and place. Others were obliged to take the sea, uncertain way to reach another city with the hope to find a welcoming place. Being a displaced person in a tent or refugees struggling on borders or returnees trying to rebuild their beloved place, all of them need a welcoming place, a place to feel at home, a place for reconciliation, a place to connect with others, a place to rebuild peace. The challenge then is to create more than a public space where people gather. The real idea is to be able to connect people, to make sure they engage with each other, to use place-making as an excuse to bring different communities to the same table to achieve one goal, which is peace-making, reimagining peace, إعادة تخيل السلام. Thank you very much. شكرا لكم جميعا. hello, everyone. I hope you enjoy it so far, although I became a little bit emotional, but here we go. It is what it is. So try to show a little bit different things about our beloved, the Middle East. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague, Kilian. Kilian has got more than 25 years of experience in emergency responses, working with the United Nations and different organizations in Europe and so on how to respond to emergency. And he is the man, I could say, behind Al Zaatari Camp and the evolution behind it, and how he created an interesting governance system which more or less mediate the top down and bottom up. Kilian at the moment he is in Tunisia, and I believe recently, just last week or so, he's been to Greece to help the Greek government on the current Syrian refugees crisis. As you know, a week ago or so, there was a crisis in one of the camps there. Back to you, Kilian, and thanks very much for accepting our invitation on behalf of Urban Design Group and the Academy of Urbanism.
Yeah, thank you, and good evening to everyone. Greetings from Tunis, Tunisia. I'm actually on my way to Greece tonight. I delayed my departure because I thought this was important. It was important to exchange. It was important to tell this story, an amazing story of a camp which was to become a city. Sad in the beginning, somewhat now a place where I think there is a new community, there is some hope, while the reality, of course, is still dire, because Syria is not what it used to be. Syria is not a Syria of the future yet. Syria is in a tragic situation. This is now a while ago, back in early 2013, UNHCR, I was working at the time in Mogadishu as the Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator, asked me to take over that camp, and in Zaatari, 15 kilometers from the Syrian border. And I thought at that time of my life, well, I didn't feel like managing yet another camp, another crisis. I felt like having a break. And well, UNHCR, the management, the Assistant High Commissioner told me at the time, well, you will see, this is different. And yes, she was right. Back in early March 2013, when I reached Al Zaatari, well, I found a place which was described by the journalists as the hell of all camps. A place of where the refugees themselves, the Syrians themselves, described it as the hell. Where the aid workers working there described it as the hell. Why? What was going wrong? Everything seemed to be right on paper. Everything had been done as was written in the emergency handbook, in all sorts of guidelines of how to plan and design a space for 100,000 people. That was sort of the planning figure, although it was growing every month, because over 3,000 people arrived at times every night, reaching from the Syrian border, being bused and transferred from the Syrian border to the camp, where they were received humanitarian emergency assistance, received a tent, were allocated a place the following morning. And well, everything again was as per the book. There was enough water, there was enough food, there was enough of everything according to the standards. And yet it had become the hell because there was violence, an amazing level of violence, incredible levels of violence. A police officer was attacked and died. Lots of violence amongst the people themselves, amongst the 100,000 or so living in Zaatari at the time. Sexual violence, incredible violence against the aid workers, stone throwing every day, response by the Jordanian security forces with tear gas. I remember one afternoon, the police major of the major of the gendarmerie telling me, well, we run out of tear gas. We don't have enough tear gas anymore. And well, the other side didn't run out of stones. So there was something going fundamentally wrong, very wrong, because that's not normal. Because if you feed people, if you house them, I mean, you give them a tent, if you give them enough water, if you give them enough medical care, why should people rebel? And that was sort of the question. That's why UNHCR sent me there, because they knew that normally I try to look at situations from another angle. And yes, that was basically what I engaged to do, trying to understand what was that story of the people. Why were they throwing stones at the helpers? Why were they discontent with the fact that they were received and, well, protected in their survival? And that was exactly the point. It was survival. The standards describing how to keep someone alive don't forcibly keep someone as a human being. These were people who were dispossessed, yes, of their homes, of their places in Syria. They were dispossessed, however, primarily of their identity. Mass displacement takes that away from you. It takes away from the individual that capacity to feel yourself not as a number, not as a statistics, not as a logistic challenge. I mean, it takes away from you the entire humanity, which makes us human beings. And the NGOs, the United Nations, we all looked at that space as, that logistic challenge where we had to provide the number of people living there with X liters of water and so many kilocalories and so many square meters. So that basic understanding that we had to deal actually with individuals, 100,000 individuals, not with a figure 100,000 divided into men, women, and then breaking it down into age groups, and eventually counting some of the extremely vulnerable, that needed another look at it. And there was this moment when we had an extreme violence outbreak, where we had an attack against the police, and which was orchestrated, organized. And that's when I started sitting down with the people, with those who had organized this. I spent a whole night in that camp with a colleague, a Jordanian colleague, and we sat down, and that's when we started really talking about what was the vision, what was the place about. And I discovered that, yes, we had built a storage facility for people. And on the other side, we had, of course, some crooks and some thieves and people who were benefiting from the situation, but primarily people who wanted to be recognized in being those human beings. And they also started to understand at that time that return was not an immediate option. And then just imagine yourself when you are put into such a place. And we're experiencing this right now on the island of Lesbos, where there is this new camp being set up, this new emergency camp with tents. And I just watched a video a few minutes ago. That looks all great. But why are they unhappy about this? Because that's what they feel is going to be their place to stay for a long time, because there is no European way forward which actually looks into giving them again a new life. And that was exactly the same situation in Jordan, in Zaatari at that moment. They needed and they understood a living space, and they started shaping that space as they felt was more adequate and more adapted to their individual requirements. That's when they started building identity in making that difference through moving the tents, which drove our site planners crazy, which drove the technicians who were dealing with the various aspects of organizing the logistics and the management of the camp, which drove them into states of despair because everything changed overnight. People moved things around. And we tried to counter that. We tried to keep the tents in rows. We tried to keep the communal toilets and the communal kitchens and the communal showers there where they were. But that's not what the people thought was the right way to do. So they started vandalizing. Over 90 buildings, which we had built for communal activities, were dismantled, were vandalized. The materials being used for individual toilets, individual kitchens, individual showers. Yes, and suddenly we had 14,000 households with showers, toilets, and individual kitchens because, and this is one of the myths in such situations, we had considered that there were a community. There were not. There were 100,000 individuals kept into eventually family units who wanted to prove that they had a name, they had that identity, which was so difficult to keep during their flight, during their escape from Syria. And so that night, after that violent incident, that's when I understood that there was something else we needed to do. We needed to move together towards a common vision. We needed to move together towards that situation of developing the space, the services, as people would experience in any other location where there are 100,000 people living together. And that's when I had realized that, again, we had built a storage place for 100,000 people, and there we're building a city. And that was the moment when I said, now let's build that city together. Let's move in that direction, which you want, and which in the end makes the whole place much more sustainable. And obviously that's also a critical moment because that is not what our logic is all about. Our logic is that when somebody escapes, the ultimate dream, that's rightly so, is to go back. However, we also need to realize that that's not the reality. That's how humanity, unfortunately or fortunately, has evolved. People have been pushed out. People have moved forward, and people changed. And this was also the case here. There were primarily people from the south of Syria. There are people from the south of Syria, of the region of Dara, and many of them coming from little towns, little villages. They had never lived in a city of 100,000 people. And that's where there's also other things happening. Suddenly there are opportunities building up, immense opportunities which we didn't like. Opportunities, for instance, such as for the electricians or those who thought they were electricians to connect the individual tents and then later the containers or caravans, as they're called in the Middle East, to connect them to the public lighting. We had suddenly electricity bills for $800,000 a month as UNHCR to pay to the electricity provider. They had made all the connections and they made a business out of this. Vandalizing and building toilets and kitchens and so on, well, that needed masons, it needed plumbers, and it needed other people who were doing a number of services. Creating the individual spaces, decorating them, designing them, that needed architects, designers, but it also needed shops which were selling items which were not in the menu of the aid agencies. And that's how the famous Champs-Élysées, not Champs-Élysées, but the Champs-Élysées, referring to Syria, came up and are all about. Roughly, at some point, we counted 3,000 shops which had been established along the main axis. 3,000 shops which were selling, of course, food. There were restaurants, there were bakeries, producing all sorts of things people used to like, and that's normal. You want to eat them. You don't want the food which is being distributed by the aid agencies forcibly. decoration shops with materials for your curtains, for all sorts of things. Carpenters making furniture, particularly at some point out of the sheets, the ground sheets from the containers, from the caravans. There were pet shops, because people like to actually have a bird cage, have an aquarium, have a rabbit or a guinea pig, like all of us. So around that urge to become again an individual with different tastes came an economy up to an estimated $13-14 million turnover in the place. You will ask me, why and how did they have all that money? Of course, there were aid goods. A lot of people didn't stay in the camp. They were selling the goods. Somebody was buying them, was reselling them, smuggling them out of the camp, which became a nightmare as well. But of course, they brought in cash. It brought in immense money, besides, of course, a few jobs given by the aid agencies. But it was all about that urge to recreate something which is called life. Nothing better for someone to be able to actually close and lock the door, but also to open that door and welcome you into a home away from home, a new home, maybe the home forever, who knows? But also being able to be proud of decoration, design, taste. And someone who we had invited to be here tonight, Margherita Moscardini, an Italian artist, she picked this up and we worked on that project together, an amazing project, because people, even when they still had only tents, the first thing they were doing was setting up fountains like fountains with water coming out, and spending enormous time and energy on that. And you know why? Because the fountain, besides being a feature in many Syrian homes as part also of the cooling and mechanism, is also a representation of some form of home. You sit next to your fountain, you have your bird cage and birds are singing, you have your cup of tea, and that represents home. So different fountains with different designs. There were fountains with green water, with pink water, with orange water. They were made in different forms, are made in different forms. And so Margherita recorded and documented the fountains and made a fantastic exhibition. And she's also currently setting up fountains in a number of villages and towns across Europe, which actually are based on the designs made by the Syrians living in the camp. And there was this moment when I think the people moved away from understanding themselves as refugees, but understanding themselves as people again, understanding themselves as, well, having started a new life, which of course doesn't please, again, the narrative of return, what I call quite often the myth of return, which, of course, the governments and the whole world dream about the good refugee who goes home. But a good refugee is not the one who stays and builds a house. Although, again, that's the reality, as we have seen in Jordan and the whole Middle East. All the major cities have come out of displacement, have come out of refugees. Half of Amman is a Palestinian settlement. You can still see today, actually, the design or the layout of the tents, the way of how the streets are shaped. Beirut is another place which is full of different quarters and parts which have been built up by refugees. That's the reality. And somehow that moment started also in Zaatari. And that, to accompany that, was, of course, a major challenge, because it is not the logic of the aid agencies. It's not the logic governments have, and not liking any constructions to come up. And that's when we started then inviting the city of Amsterdam to help us how to design the city. How do you come up with a transportation system in a place like Zaatari, 3 kilometers by 2 kilometers? Of course, being Dutch, we talked about bicycles, and they supplied, actually, it took quite a while, supplied a number of bicycles. But here again, I remember that moment when the city planner of the transport planner of Amsterdam was talking and saying, "Why are here no bicycles yet? This is a place where there should be bicycles. We will give you bicycles." Well, the Syrians didn't wait until Amsterdam would donate bicycles. A few days later, there were 3 bicycle shops, and bicycles were being brought into the camp and being used. We had only a couple of weeks later, after that discussion on bicycles, we had the first pizza delivery with a mountain bike. And so that is the dimension which is so important to understand of settlements coming up, temporary settlements which become permanent. And that's also where you need to shift gears. We need to shift the entire logic of how you look at that, which is, of course, as again, not the narrative we usually have. And so that's something which the people of Zaatari have been teaching us, have been teaching that, well, I mean, there is something like a transformation of a temporary space into a city that is possible. And it's actually by the people themselves, with their energy, with their ideas, with their designs, with their aspirations to be human beings, that is very possible. So what happened, coming back to the violence, which was so predominant and really so unpleasant to experience every day, the children were actually the worst. I became infamous because at some time I said, I hate the kids because they were throwing stones at us. We had over 2,000 very violent children, completely lost. Parents had given up to be parents and trying to teach and educate their children. But this violence was really the big problem. But what happened, and I think this is the real story there, was it took us a year in transforming our story of how we looked, the external service providers actually, how we looked at the space, how we looked at the people. That helped us to move forward. We established dialogue. We cut it down into 12 districts. We had people responsible in each district. We knew with whom we were talking. We were talking about planning. We had a whole governance system designed to run and manage the districts. Obviously, again, important to respect the fact that this was not Syria, but Jordan. So that brought, in fact, a total transformation to the people. It brought the transformation of understanding that they had responsibilities. And also, while at the same time they're building up their identity, their pride, and their dignity again, being able to lock their doors and having a home, that built then community. And suddenly, all the bad guys, if you can say this, there were people who were really very unpleasant. They became increasingly isolated by the community, not forcibly the police. Although here, I must say, with the help of the UK, we had actually a very successful, and it's still going on, very successful community policing program where the cops learned how to actually speak with people and not only throw tear gas at them. And so that transformation took 1 year. And I can proudly say that the joint effort led to a space, to a community, to a camp, which had become a more pleasant settlement with all, of course, still the sadness of the reason why that all came about. But it became so peaceful that there's incredible things going on now, which were very difficult in the beginning. You talk about a lot of educational programs, designs programs, arts programs, sports programs, things which are incredibly valuable for that, what I call beyond survival. And Zaatari has shown us how important that term is, beyond survival. And we can do that in respecting what people themselves feel is the right thing to do. So a participatory contribution by everyone to a common and a joint vision and project. That's what Zaatari has been teaching us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kilian. How can I say a nice conclusion and end to the lovely talk and the move beyond the survival stage. Now, I should have said earlier, the Italian artist Margherita, unfortunately, she couldn't join us today, but I am delighted Kilian managed to cover some of the points about her work, and I will cover some of her stuff as well in my presentation. Now, what I will do, and I've been asked to do, I am going to show the transformation and how the camp moved beyond the emergency and beyond the survival stage, and how it become in a way or another informal city. I will support that with the proper visualization. So I will try to be quick, but the whole narrative will complement and it will show exactly what Kilian said. Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yes, good. Thanks, Olya. Now, first of all, the talk itself is, how can I say, based on my visit to the camp, but also more importantly, a thorough study for the last 4 years, looking at, how can I say, main report, main publication, literature, and grey literature. And I will talk about, how can I say, the interrelationship between the top-down approach in the camp and the bottom-up through the collective place-making approach created by the inhabitants, let us put it this way, and the governance system. Now, I will illustrate, how can I say, how in situations of the social stress, how the collective initiatives empower the refugees to customize and adopt their environment and expand the opportunity of income-generating activities, but also enhance social interactions. Let me start with this important quote, which all of you are familiar with Jane Jacob. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. Having said that, the camps, to me, especially Al Zaatari story and the narrative, is at the heart of this quote. So I would love to add to her quote, word camps. Now, I would like to zoom out a little bit, just to give, how can I say, an international perspective. Imagine worldwide now, in 2020, there is around 70 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. That's, by the way, is the population of France. Now, 55% of those refugees are from 3 main countries: Syria, about 6 to 7 million, Afghanistan, 2.5, and South Sudan, 1.4. Another statistics quickly. Every minute, we have 24 people are displaced worldwide, and 1 in every 113 people on Earth is an asylum seeker or internally displaced or a refugee. Now, the reason why I am mentioning this, if we're speaking about 15-minute city, issue of migrations, issue of refugees, asylums, is really at the heart of this global. It's become a global phenomena. It's not about only one country or one, how can I say, region. So this becoming, to me, how do we accommodate those is so important. Now, apart from the statistics and numbers, at the end of the day, as Kilian said, refugees are not number. Refugees at the end of the day are a human being. War, even natural disaster, does not erase humanity, culture, pride, or hope. Zooming into the Syrian situation now, this is the Syrian map to the right. Just to make it very clear, in Syria so far, there are around 3.5 Syrian refugees in Turkey, 250,000 in Iraq, more than 1 million in Lebanon, and they are, I have to admit, in a dire situation, about 650,000 in Jordan, but also there are more than 6 million internally displaced people in Syria, especially around 4 million of them squeezed out in a very small spot in a city called Idlib beside the Turkish border towards the northeast. And all are still in need of a humanitarian assistance. Now, interestingly, the way I see camp, and this is quite important, I see the camp, it is a space of paradox. The reason why I say it is a space of paradox, because it places the refugee in a space that neither belongs nor is wanted by their host nation state. That's the problem with refugees. This is the first pictures which attracted me to make this kind of piece of research. This is, by the way, when the camp being designed for humanitarian aid, for a humanitarian to do with emergency. It's, as you can see, whether a tent, whether a caravan, rigid, uniform, and it's imposed by top-down approach. 2 or 3 people took decision. And I repeat myself, it's all to do with dealing with temporary measure, which is emergency. But this is, my goodness, when I looked at the pictures before and after, this is to the left-hand side, this is after 6 or about 4 or 5 months from establishing the caravan. This is after 2 or 3 years. Oh my goodness, what's happened to the caravans? You barely see the caravans. Where those new elements and the structures? Why the caravans has got a new water facility and so on? So where this come? How this informality and where this informality come from? And this is one of the most famous pictures you will see. I thought, oh my goodness, this is becoming really kind of informal cities. You will see different kind of spaces, public spaces, private, and the one in the middle is the high street. That's called, by the way, the Champs-Élysées. Why Champs-Élysées? If you look at the middle, there is a huge hospital owned by French authority. Sham came word from Syria. That high street is become the Champs-Élysées, which has 3,000 shops. It's become the extended living room for the Syrian refugees. By the way, and I have to admit, the situation in the camp, although the camp is a camp, it is acceptable, but the situation in the camp so far is paradise comparing with other situations for Syrian refugees elsewhere in Lebanon or even in Idlib or so on. And this is another pictures. It showed me, wow, the different spaces and the places created by the refugees over time. There is nothing better than the power of the Google. I got so excited to see how the camp evolved, and I was so eager to know why such rapid transformation, how you move from rigid camp, which is more or less really based on military approach, to more sophisticated. If you look at the pictures on the top, the move from December 2012 to January 2014, the whole structure dissolve, and the informality and the clustering and courtyarding start emerging over time. I would like to go back to this slide. This is quite important because I agree with Kilian. The problem, the United Nations, when they establish a camp, it's all about temporary. It has to be temporary. But this is the refugee camp in Baqa after the Israeli war in 1968 on the top. And see what this Baqa now, it's become a proper city with proper infrastructure. It is very informal. Al-Zaatari, where is Al-Zaatari? Al-Zaatari is about 15 kilometers to the south of the Syrian border. 90% of the inhabitants came from one city called Daraa, which is close to the Syrian border. 90%. Now, why I intend to mention this statistics, because those people brought their culture and way of living. And that's really helped when it's come to how the camp evolved. Some important statistics, because some people challenge me whether it is a city or not. Well, it has, according to United Nations website, 80,000 inhabitants. 57% are under 24 and around 20% are under 5 years old. It's only 5.3 kilometers square. Interestingly, for those in the UK, that's the size of Dundee waterfront. 5.3 kilometers square only. Sadly, the camp every week produce 80 bears a week. Those people, they don't have neither Syrian nationality nor Jordanian nationality. The camp opened in 29th of July 2012. It has now 11 schools, 27 community centers, 2 hospitals with 55 beds, and 9 healthcare. So when you look at the facilities and services, it's really a proper large town or a small cities. The camp as a stand, it has around 24,000 prefabricated caravan. I will mention where the caravan came from. But just quickly, if you look at the map to the left, the small map, this is where people come from a town called Daraa, very close to the camp itself when they fled. The map to the right, it shows the origin of those people, and I intend to show you the map where they come from, because you will see similarity on how they evolve the camp. They really imitate more or less the same pictures, the same place they used to live. The pictures here at the back show Al Zaatari. Al Zaatari, they got the name from a Jordanian village, which is in the front. It is gated. The camp is gated, no communication whatsoever with the external world, including with, with Jordanians. So no communication whatsoever. It is really gated community, you could say. This is the master plan. To give credit to United Nations and to Kilian, and by the way, Kilian being regarded as the former mayor of the camp, they split the camp into a 12 district. That was, fantastic strategy. Why? Because each district, they managed to have kind of design code. For each district, you will have communities, you will have leader, you'll have number of services, food provision, facilities, services, and so on. But what I like over the time, they managed to appoint a leader, or in Arabic, Mukhtar al-Hara, leader of the neighborhood. The district become a neighborhood. That leader act as a mediator between the local communities and what they aspire, what their demand and needs, and the camp governance and management people. So that's the camp itself. If you look at the color in red, this is where key services and facilities located. The long, red line, that's the key high streets, the Champs-Élysées with the 3,000 shops. This is exactly the design code they use in the camp. This is the 12 district they use, and this is how they zoom into each district, how many people in each district, and how many households in each tent or caravan. I intend to show you this section. I'm sure you will ask me why there is no vertical elements. Jordanian government has prevented so far, since the beginning of the camp up to now, importing any materials or structures will lead to permanent structure. So even below the caravan, there is no foundation. There is no real buildings per se, apart from 2 or 3 key facilities and services. The whole idea of the caravan not to have permanent, structure. No wonder why there is no second or third floor. So you don't see horizontal structure. Hence, it is all there is no vertical structure, hence it is all horizontal. This is just, I thought I should show you the density. Speaking about 15 Minute City, interestingly, because I was astonished, why in some area it is dense comparing with others. Then I found out density was to do with the proximity to the facilities and services, and the proximity to the main gate when people come, from outside. I really found that interesting. And proximity to very close to the high street, which is the Champs-Élysées. So something as well to do with the sense of community, but also the proximity. I intend to show the Maslow hierarchy of needs. That's to me, although it's crude and fluid, the Maslow itself. But what I found it interesting, how the refugees, first of all, they looking for basic needs, and basic needs came from the top-down approach dominated by the United Nations. And it was all about basic things, space, management, security, safety, as Kilian said. However, over the time, over the time, once people start realizing, oh my goodness, this is no longer temporary. This is no longer about, oh, we're going back tomorrow to Syria. They start moving into the next stage, transforming the space, the physical space, into more place with a lot of social value, active creativity, and inspiring. It's all about meeting psychological needs in terms of belonging, esteeming needs, but also even self-fulfillment. So, and I will show that through examples. Let me start. I would encourage you to look at, this is the United Nations handbook on how to deal with emergency worldwide. It's so top down. It's all to do with the humanitarian aid, rigid, focusing on targets and units and needs. And it's based in really universal standardization on how to build shelters and settlement layouts. We'll give you just a brief example. This is how they design a camp. Family, for each family, you have a tent or caravan. Up to 5 people will have one caravan or tent with one latrine. For 80 families, you will have one water tap and 2 refuse drums. So it's really, as you can see, based on standardization, and it's to do with the very military approach, let us put it this way. And they have standardization up to 20,000 families. For 20,000, you will have one health and feeding center and one market. This is exactly how they design it. And actually, the original organization of the camp features, it's based on rows to allow access for, first of all, allow for accessibility, fire preventions, and sanitations and management. No consideration for culture sensitivity, no considerations for social value. That's create a huge tension. Why? Because to start with, all the refugees must share the bathroom, must share the kitchen, must share, everything's about sharing. And the refugees really refuse that solutions. This is why over the time, they start smuggling and creating their own services, facilities, and drainage system. So briefly, the top-down approach, because it was to do with emergency, temporary, it's complex, rigid, assertive, it's based on fixed end state, and it's all about really command control, especially from safety and security perspective. Now, someone might argue why we don't, how can I say, internationally provide better services and facility. Professor David said, give refugees better condition, and there will be less international pressure to get them back home. So that's one of the reasons. Now, I would like to speak about the evolution now. And let me skip this one just for the sake of time. I would like to focus now moving from basic needs imposed by, you could say, the top-down approach. Let me move into more the collective placemaking, which is all to do with the psychological needs and fulfillment. To start with, let me start with the unit. They start in the Zaatari camp, they started with tent. And then because some tents caught a lot of fires and some refugees lost their lives, and the tent has a lot of challenges because the camp itself is located in nowhere, more or less in Sahara, in really Sahara, where the weather could be so harsh in summertime, let alone wintertime. They introduced the caravan. The whole idea about caravan is easy to disassemble, easy to move, easy to structure, and it was donated by Gulf states and Japan and Korea. It cost about $2,500, and the size of the caravan is about 15 meters square exactly. But what I found it interesting, because it is so small for 5 people, imagine all family, they have to do cooking, sleeping, living in 15 meters square. Refugees, when they realize, oh my goodness, we're going to stay here for a longer time, they start acquiring more spaces. The first things they did, they start merging the caravan with the tent. And they start really, that's end up with hybrid structure, similar to these images here. And I was so astonished because in here you see, wow, different structure. Even I was astonished with that's where the corrugated roofs come from and why they put that. It's all about protecting themselves from the harsh weather. You might tell me where those materials come from. Those materials come from through smuggling. The refugees managed to establish a relationship with those who serve the camp on daily basis. A lot of trucks come to the camp to serve the camp as a whole, they managed to establish economic relationship with them, smuggling those, and it's all about creating convenient place to them. Of course, it is not pleasant. As you can see, the most challenge is the drainage all the time in the camp. Another thing I found it interesting, the caravan itself, because it is so easy to move and maneuver, this flexibility, how can I say, gave a lot of advantages. And the caravan, what I like about it, refugees themselves designed caravan conveyor where they start move it around. By the way, the refugees themselves establish a very strong relationship with the management people. So just to give credit to the how can I say, the top-down approach, they establish that trust, and they start negotiating their daily how can I say, relationship with the top-down approach. So basically, what I like about this placemaking act as how can I say, become an act of collectivism, where camp inhabitants see to help each other as a partner in adversity. The transformation into this kind of hybrid environment was really a process of daily negotiation between space, materials, social dynamics, but that's including, how can I say, all the time involving those who manage and govern the camp. And I found it so fascinating how it starts first about me, my space, and then how people start calling their neighbors, those who trust each other back in Daraa, in city, and how they start merging the tent and camp, and then they start creating shared places. They start sharing two caravans, they start sharing sometimes courtyarding, sometimes creating shaded courtyarding. And not only that, over time, they start establishing their own watering system, water tanks, or even, how can I say, digging a hole to create their own drainage system. But the most important lessons, I like it as well, the way they really transform the public space, how they create informal public space, which become really the most important living space for all refugees. I really like this slide. This is one of the interesting author, Ayham Dalal. He managed to map the housing typologies created by the refugees over time, from the tent only to the tents and the caravan. And now, wow, the more refugees feeling comfortable with their space, the more they claiming that space, and the more they become, how can I say, rich. And I will say something about economy later on. They start trading those caravans and buying more caravans and creating more spaces. There are some clustering where 5 or 6 families live together, the father, the mom, and the son, and the grandchildren. And then they start creating private courtyards and some sharing and public courtyards. I found these pictures. This is, by the way, by Margherita, the Italian artist. I found this one stunning because it does remind me with the very similar pictures back in Homs, back in Damascus, back in Daraa. These narrow alleyways, it's all about privacy, public spaces, courtyarding. The Italian artist managed to map around 65 fountains in the camp, 65 fountains in the camp itself. And this is one of them. I found this one is astonished. I would love to have one of these in Dundee, actually. Lovely decoration, high quality stuff, actually. So what I like, placemaking even become, in this case, a psychotherapy, which really become a real attempt to lessen anxiety by producing the familiar or producing patterns of urban living that resonate with their recent past. One of the interesting examples by United Nations as well, they gave the opportunities for the refugees to name streets. So each district now has a range of primary and secondary streets with Arabic names. And those names came from Daraa itself. As you can see in the map, those who read those streets, they are all Arabic names. So it's all about resonating the past. Let me just show you an example. That's another example for a big family. They try to reproduce the familiar with even interesting balcony as well and veranda. The kitchen itself, for those who are familiar with in Syria, that's, by the way, you will see exactly the same one back in villages in Syria. What I like about the transformation process, how it started with basic environmental response, how to insulate the house, but how became over time a complex social cluster. So the socialist, how we move from the physical structure of the camp, and how the camp transform into the hybrid is through not only social dynamic, but a social structure through collective approach. This is one of the kitchen as well. You really see similar one back in Syria. Inequality. This is, by the way, to one of the leader, Sheikh Al-Hara, in order to distinct himself, to make himself important, he put an arch. He built an arch. It's not complete yet. He might complete it or not, but just to give him a sense of power. Back to the Al-Zaatari High Street. I will finish shortly. It has more than 3,000 shops, and it's all, what I like, the caravan value was zero. Why? Because it was all donated. Interestingly, some refugees, those who competent and they have businesses and money back in Daraa, they start smuggling and bringing the money and the resources back to the camp. And they start establishing their own businesses. And they start buying. So interestingly, suddenly the caravan start having value. By the way, some of the caravan now has being sold for £1,000 sometimes. Imagine, from zero value to £1,000. So it's become, they start establishing their social enterprising. By the way, some of the caravans owned by Jordanian, they start really establishing governance system and trade and relationship with the external world. Some of them to do with food, some of them hair salon. I know recently they have opened a swimming pool. Refugees managed to merge 2 or 3 caravan, and he established, how can I say, a swimming pool. And this is what it looks like now. It's become one of the most vibrant, how can I say, a street. It's not ideal, I agree with you. By the way, all the 80% of the caravans now are linked illegally to the electricity. All linked illegally to the electricity. And the camp must pay the rent every month. So the United Nations must pay the rent to the Jordanian government. What I like, those 3,000 shops produce millions and millions of dollars. Every month, they become part of the economy in Jordan. Imagine. So we move from survivor to aid, and now people, how can I say, start becoming producers with creative ideas and thoughts. And I will show you. So, but the problem, placemaking here become as a competition, where those with power, resources acquire more at the expense of those who do not. That's one of the challenge. Those who couldn't afford to rent or buy. By the way, you could rent a shop in the high street, and there is a legal system created by the refugees themselves, where you have to have witnesses and you have to sign, blah blah blah. But those inside the camp couldn't afford to rent or buy a caravan. They established their own small businesses from the tent itself, or so on. This is one of the examples, become very famous examples even by Reuters. This business they produce baklava, you know baklava. They started with 1 or 2 caravan, but because it become established, now it has about 15 or 20 people employed, and they export, they send the baklava away to Amman city. High quality and cheaper. So the camp itself is really become an economic free zone. I would love to show these pictures, and I'm sure Karen will say something about it. There is a lot of graffiti in the camp. A lot of graffiti in the camp by the Syrian refugees. What I like about it, it's all about education for the children. children and the refugees, elderly people asking us, don't forget our children. Those people must be educated and must help building future Syria. Just to sum up, and I will be free. I am not against the top-down. We need the top-down, absolutely. Why? Because the top-down has got the money, has got the resources, has got kind of governance system. But we need, as well as Jane Jacobs, kind of a mechanism to organize complexity. Organize complexity, there is better than the refugees to do so, because they have a simple rules. They really end up with a very interesting emergent solution, very adaptive. And it's all about the trust. It's all about self-organizations. It's all about collaboration and collective approach to place. So we need a mechanism for the top-down to meet the bottom-up. So 3 things to be learned from it. Placemaking in the camp is an act of collectivism where camp inhabitants see to help each other as a partner in adversity. Placemaking as a competitions where those with the power resources acquire more at the expense of those who do not. But placemaking as a psychotherapy, an attempt to lessen anxiety by producing really the familiar. Thank you very much, and apologies if I took some times. Olga, are you okay, Olga?
Yes, Husam, okay.
Thank you. Apologies if I took a little bit more time. But now, shall we move to our speakers, Karen? Professor Karen, she is from Washington University. She is not only an academic and scholar, but she works as a consultant for United Nations. She has worked a lot with Al Zaatari Camp over the continuous life projects. She has done fantastic co-design co-projects with more than 2,000 people in the refugee camp. Welcome, Karen, and thanks very much for accepting our invitations.
Shukran, Husam. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I get like thumbs up? Yes, good. All right, let me get sharing my screen here. Okay, all right, back to the beginning here. Thank you, everybody, for this wonderful opportunity to share some of my experiences at Zaatari. And first, I just start with Bismillah Ar-Rahman, in the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful. The title of this presentation is Zaatari, Food and Stories from the Syrian People of Zaatari Camp. As Husam mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm originally from Eastern Canada, from Newfoundland, but now my second home is Zaatari. I started at Zaatari in January 2015, just after Kilian left. Kilian and I actually corresponded. He graciously invited my research team that I was part of. The reason I started at Zaatari was to do a large study about how young people use mobiles and the internet, and to contrast that usage with, how they were using mobiles and the internet in Syria. But, January 2015, I'm still at Zaatari, and I spend more time in Zaatari than I do in Seattle. In fact, actually, the reason I'm able to spend so much time at Zaatari is because at the University of Washington, most of my teaching is online. So, of course, I can do that from anywhere. And right now, I just started my sabbatical leave. So I just kind of closed up my life in Seattle. And now my golden retriever and I are in New York, and we're waiting to catch a plane probably to Istanbul tomorrow, and then back to Jordan. So over the years, as an embedded field researcher at Zaatari, I do mostly large-scale, long-term missions. A lot of them tend to focus on information sharing, placemaking, technology, and things like that. One of my largest missions is Zaatari Camp Libraries, which is a phenomenal project that I'd love to talk with you about another time, because it's the world's first refugee-run, camp-wide library system in the world. It's really a phenomenal project. But another one that's very near and dear to my heart is the Zaatari Camp cookbook. And I just want to point out here that I never had a mission. No one said to me, the UN camp manager, UNHCR, they never said, Karen, can you come, do a cookbook with the people of Zaatari? Instead, it was a finding that emerged bottom up, organically, which is one of the beauties when you do, field ethnography. So, one of the things that happened, I'm a foodie, as most of us are. And one of the things you learn quickly in the Middle East is that there's a pecking order. People say Palestinian food, voila, so delicious. And then we say Lebanese food, ooh, so very, very good. But then when you say Syrian food, everybody goes quiet because they say, yes, Syria is the very, very best. And what I learned quite quickly after that is that Zaatari is actually probably the world's most exclusive restaurant. And this gets a little bit to what Husam mentioned about Zaatari being a closed refugee camp. Now, like I said, Zaatari is my second home. I spend, most of my days there. And it is closed, and that you have to have an invitation to enter, you have to be invited, and then you have to have, security permission, and things like that. But there's actually a lot of interaction between Syrians and Jordanians going back and forth. People leave the camp all the time. And also, of course, internet connectivity resumed about a year and a half ago. So there's a lot of interaction. But to be able to have this food, you have to be inside the camp. It's not quite so easy to get it. The food is amazing. So anyway, this project that I'm going to tell you a bit about, and the cookbook itself is being published. Our primary publisher is called Goose Lane. It's in Canada. So it will be published in English and French, and of course in Arabic. It's based on 4 to 5 years of design ethnography. It's based on a lot of home visits, which means co-cooking. I got to, cook, alongside the people in their homes. A lot of workshops. Workshop is kind of a euphemism for any kind of a gathering you do with people. Walking around the camp, people keeping diaries. Wherever there was food in the camp, so was I. Right. And of course, even in Oman, wherever I go, I was learning about cooking. In total, this is what makes this project really fascinating, is that a lot of, participatory design, co-design, whatever term you want to use, usually N equals 10, N equals 20, something like that. At Zaatari, we don't do anything on a small scale. All right, Kilian was talking about that. Everything for us is big. Everything is big. So well over 2,000 people have participated in the making of this cookbook. And the book has everything in it: food, stories, poetry, art, Arab medicine, many, many wonderful things. And what you see here on the right, I got some samples of some of the content in the book, but this is by one of our artists who did a lot of the illustrations for the book, and was talking about there in Arabic how that it's food and stories in Zaatari Camp. So this is the very first recipe. So I mentioned that the idea for it, came from some of the early people were keeping diaries for me. And this is a young girl. She was 16. She was talking about being a student. One of the projects was trying to learn how young people act as what I call ICT wayfarers, how they connect, help other people through information and technology. And a very common theme was girls. A girl, is a euphemism used for any woman who is unmarried. You might use Ansa. Anyway, it was a recipe for cake. So it's quite common for girls to draw pictures of themselves baking cake for orphans, for unaccompanied minors, of which there are a lot in Zaatari. And this recipe was fantastic because she wrote it in English as well. And she was very precise with her measurements, glass of flour, glass of oil, glass of water, 2 eggs, and so forth. She talks about mixing it. And here inside, it's a picture of a caravan. And I gave them Instamax Fuji cameras so people could take pictures because for the most part at Zaatari, aid workers and so forth are only in the camp from Sunday to Thursday. They leave around 3 o'clock in the afternoon and they're not there on the weekends. And, it's fantastic to hear underneath the photo, she wrote, I love my home. So we embarked on that from the process. I asked our camp manager would it be okay to do the cookbook. And they came back the next day and they said, yes, this would be a great idea. So I started with the women and they said, would you like to do this? And they said, Tamam, yes, absolutely. And then they said, basically, well, what is a cookbook? Because think about it. If you're leaving your home, if you have shelling, mortars, snipers and so forth, what are you going to take? Well, truth is, they didn't really have cookbooks anyway, because everyone learned how to cook from their mother, their grandmother, and so forth. So we had much discussion about, what a recipe would look like. We didn't want to look at Western or Arab cookbooks because we wanted this to be, purely a Zaatari. So I gave people a high quality linen paper, gold Sharpies and so forth. And then people created the pages socially because maybe somebody had low literacy, but they knew how to the recipe. Anyway, word went viral all across the camp about what we were doing. And it was just amazing because you think about Syria and especially with Daesh, with ISIS, and everything that happened in Raqqa and places, and how many landmarks are being destroyed, communities being destroyed. I talk about my own research. I talk about the decimation of the social fabric. And this was a way to restore all of these things through food, because people not only talked about the memories of the foods that they enjoyed, but also how they learned to make it, how they felt when they prepared this recipe, why it was good for you. So we had a lot of Arab medicine, and you can see kind of here on the right side, we know what the template was that we followed for it. So another highlight was a cooking contest that went viral across the camp. It was fascinating because women and men competed together, and kind of a social norm at camp is in much of Arab society is that things are kind of gendered. It came down to a big competition between the basbousa cream and maglouba. Maglouba is Arabic for big upside down main dish, and the basbousa cream. Basbousa cream. Well, it was a tie, I guess, but the basbousa cream was amazing. The community, they decided what the prizes would be, and then I brought them in from outside of camp, and it was mostly things to promote, healthy eating, energy savings, and stuff like that. Also in line with Arab society, everybody got a welcome gift, spatulas, oven mitts, things like that. Here's some sample pages. They're going to look quite different, of course, in the final cookbook. But you can see here on the right how it was written in Arabic, and then the pages then were given to one of our absolutely amazing artists. Here's another one from Akiga. After the birth of a baby, a boy or girl, you sacrifice a sheep, kind of similar to Eid Aha, with Islam. So anyway, if it's a boy, you sacrifice 2 sheep. If it's a girl, it's 1 sheep. And you distribute the meat to your neighbors and people who are less fortunate. So anyway, this is a recipe here for kebabs. I'll give you an example of some of the poetry. This is from Abu Qasim, King Abdullah, father of Hussein. All Arab countries and foreign countries like to talk about him. He welcomed the Syrian people and others, and we love him. All Arab countries thought that he is the good place as a king. And he is from Ghouta. People at Zaatari, they are mostly from the region of Dara, known as the cradle of the revolution. But people are actually from all across Syria, from many, many different places. Just to wrap up here, some of the uniqueness of the Zaatari Camp cookbook is that it is 100% Zaatari. Everything is done, including the photography, which is food photography, is very, very specialized. We're working with an NGO called Lens on Life, and they have food specialists from Bon Appetit, Xavier, and other food magazines who work with photographers from Syria who are trained then in how to do the food photography and other types of photography that we need. But we're capturing the social nature of cooking at Zaatari, preserving memories, ways of life, also really documenting resilience and innovation and hacking, which is something that Husam and Kilian were talking about. For example, coming to Zaatari was also like returning to old Syria, returning to the old ways, the old desert ways. For example, of cooking zarb, which is a dish that you cook underground. Like a lot of Bedouin ways of cooking, how to jerry rig for refrigeration, and maybe how to hang your food high up in the air, things like that. When you don't have refrigeration, you don't have heating, and things like that. The physical artifacts right now, the original pages are all in my office in Seattle, but we really want them. We probably work with one of the local universities in northern Jordan to set it up as an archive. So we have all of these beautiful physical artifacts. The book itself is very inward, but also very outward looking. There's a lot of translations, and this is funny. Translate the book. I had some Syrian colleagues. It didn't work well because they wouldn't understand Zaatari. They wouldn't understand what a caravan is and many other euphemisms from Zaatari. They had a recipe for shawarma, and I said to my colleague, I said, "Where is the shawarma recipe? Where is it? Where is it?" And he said, "No, Karen, that is not the proper Damascus way of preparing it, so I didn't translate it." And then if they weren't from Syria, maybe if they're from another Arab country, including Jordan, then they wouldn't understand the accents from Dara, from southern Syria and things. And then there was the problem of capturing the poetic depth, so that if a woman says that she cries when she's cooking a dish, maybe something for breakfast and things, then she would really miss her mother. But when she talked about it in Arabic, there would be maybe half a page to explain what she is talking about. A big question for us as a community was how to organize the book. And it's not just like with Welcome Coffee, with Alan, we talk about Fatur, we talk about a Jalkh around the camp with boys on their bicycles, Tajim at a school with girls on the Champs-Élysées, but also on Market Street and places around, at the beauty parlors, the beauty salons with the women. We talked about maiden Zaatari. We had Ramadan, weddings, bedding babies, and Akika, Arab medicine. It was the question of how to select the best versions for some things. We had multiple versions, so the women themselves, they would choose the best. Then there's the question of what are we missing? Because we had so much, but the hardest part was like stepping back and looking at it. What are we missing? And it was amazing that we were missing hummus. We didn't have a recipe for hummus, and everyone just burst out laughing. So then the women started jotting down, recipes for hummus, and there's so many kinds of hummus. But then the other, incredible gap that we had was just bread. We didn't have pita bread, and they were looking at me and they're saying, "What is pita? What is pita?" So I pulled up my phone, and Google Translator, and then the women just burst out laughing, and they said to Mom, "You're talking about normal bread." So that's when we made sure that we had the recipe for normal bread included. So I just want to thank everybody, for inviting me here today. Shukran. Hope to see you all at Zaatari Camp maybe someday. See you at Fatur. You can certainly join us online. And on behalf of the people of Zaatari Camp, thank you. We look forward to sharing our book with the world. And biggest thank you to the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, for making everything possible, everything, not just the Zaatari cookbook, but for every day bringing me to camp and inviting me into the world there, into the life. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me for here right now.
Pleasure, Karen. Thank you very much. We have some times for some questions and interactive questions, and I managed to put down some questions for both Kilian and Karen, and possibly myself. Can we give the floor to Claudia Petra, please? Claudia? Can we unmute Claudia, please?
Yes, Husam, Claudia is unmuted.
Claudia, do you want to, how can I say, just propose your questions, please?
Your microphone is on, Claudia. Can you? But we cannot.
Okay, let us move to the second one, and maybe we come back to Claudia once we resolve the voice issue. Martina Givara. Martina?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this fascinating set of presentations, and also for me, they remind me of the time I was working in Damascus a few years ago, before the war, and also I've been kept in touch with people, and I've been involved with some work with people trying to consider returning back young displaced architects and planners, and I was in Tripoli, in Lebanon, and I saw the refugee camps there, or the Syrian refugee camps there, and so some of the things you said are familiar, but what it is amazing, and I'm sure that is it's really the energy that comes out of this terrible situation. But how can we learn? How can because some of the things you described, I saw in the Palestinian refugee camps of the UNHCR in Damascus that had evolved in the same direction, and there were communities. So somehow it seems that we failed to build up and let's use the Zaatari experience so that the next time we plan a camp, but we don't go crazy if people start moving things around, if we don't go crazy if people start to cook their own food. So how can we learn from this forever? How can we rewrite the manual so that the manual is only the first month or the first year, but then there is a second step for the evolution, allowing the evolution?
That's a really great question. The one, I guess, my experience, Jordan and other countries, for example, I've been to the Al Barashna camp in Lebanon, so, outside Beirut and so forth. It's very, very political because you have to work with the host country. And there's a lot of it's complicated because there's a lot of different variables and factors there, but the primary thought is that the camps are short term. They're not meant to be there for very long. And we've been talking a lot about caravans. And like I said, when I'm in Jordan, I'm at Zaatari every single day. I'm inside people's homes and so forth. And people laugh there. One of the ways I know that I'm accepted is in the camp, Syrians will come to me and they ask me, where is your caravan? What district do you live in? The young children will say that to me, the older people, and most people know me in the camp because I talk to them all the time on WhatsApp and Messenger, things like that. So I know a lot of people. And anyway, the caravans are not meant to last forever either. They're not well constructed. And a lot of camps you go into them, and in Jordan, like the weather is so hard in the winter, very, very bad flooding up there. Extremely bad flooding. Now the infrastructure is getting better because they've been doing a lot of build up on the roads, and things like that, just to help deal with the flooding. But anyway, you go into a caravan and you can feel the floor is sinking. You know what I mean? And then it's a problem, with the ventilation. They're not warm and things like that. So these caravans, they're not meant to last for 20 years or anything like that. Maybe 5 years anticipated lifespan for them or something. So, but this is also kind of in line with designing any kind of space for people who are internally displaced. So it's a very, very complicated question. And I'll turn this over to everybody else here, but perhaps for the people who are designing, if there's some way that they could create structures that were going to be more durable, knowing that even though politically the camps are not supposed to be there for very long, but that realistically conflict happens for many, many years, and that it's not going to be easy to have a short-term solution.
Maybe I can come in here briefly.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. The main issue remains that as long as the main narrative remains a good refugee is a returning one, which again, we're not disputing lost rights and everything that is linked to the home country and the home place. But we need to change the narrative because that is what has been continued to be taught everywhere. So I'm trying to change that into the reality of, it's going on. In 2019, from what I know, it's only 300,000-400,000 refugees or so returned in a whole year globally. So let's stop talking to everyone about this as the ultimate objective. And there's also this element of really transformation of people. Let's really think about this. I was involved myself in the establishment of the camp of Kakuma in Kenya and the camp of Dadaab as well. Back in the early 90s, there are people who have been living there. So there's 300,000 people in Dadaab and 200,000 people in Kakuma for decades. They came out of little villages. They came out of little places. It will be very difficult to return to the place of origin. So somewhat we need to change that. And then, of course, the aid agencies have to get out of this idea that they will be managing it. And this was for decades. We have that thing in Bangladesh currently ongoing. So the question is there a moment, and to whom aid agencies should be handing over. That was my concept in Zaatari, to say there should be a city management. There should be, in the same time, a city governance with services the same way as it would be anywhere else. And that was obviously not liked very much by the humanitarian sector on one hand, of course not by the Jordanian government. And again, everybody is used to that. So somewhat these two issues need to be addressed. Let go, hand over. They are very capable people of managing this. Again, not questioning in the case of Zaatari that this is Jordanian territory. I mean, the Syrians had a bit an issue there. They said, well, there's 100,000 of us here, so it can be only Syria. And a little boy I asked once, where did you take this donkey from? He said, I stole it in Jordan and I brought it here to Zaatari. Yeah. So that idea obviously needs to sort of also to be adapted. But these two things, I think, for me, are the key. I'm trying to work on that, but it's a long uphill battle, because that's the logic since actually the establishment of the Refugee Convention. Refugees and go home.
Karen, thank you, Kilian. Karen, there was a comment from colleague Deborah. She asked, when the book is published, can you let the Academy of Urbanism and the Urban Design Group know so they can get the message out and we can get copies?
Thank you. I most certainly will. Thank you.
It will be great if you let us know. I am cautious of the time.
Husam, can I just add one thing there? I forgot to mention that the royalties are returning to the people of Zaatari.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes, Karen, yes. Karen?
Yes, hello?
Yes.
I said that the royalties are returning to the people of Zaatari Camp. Hello?
Yes, Karen.
Did you hear that?
No, I'm afraid. Apologies.
I said the royalties from the book are returning to the people of Zaatari Camp.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, thank you.
But the book is available right now to order?
No. That's what I'm doing now on my sabbatical.
Okay.
So the book will be available in 2022.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's grand. There is another question. I would love to have your view on it, Karen, because you engage a lot with how can I say, the children and their family. There is questions from Nihal from Syria. Ask, what is the future of the people in Al Zaatari camp, especially the children? That's questions to you and to Kilian.
Sure. Kilian, I don't know if you'd like to speak first.
Yeah, well, I mean, what is the future? Again, I mean, I'm not saying the acceptance of this and the status quo. The future is to, again, recognize that there are people living, and this is not, again, about the basics. And I think, again, we have managed collectively, I mean, bringing Zaatari out of the dark times of being just a survival holding facility into a place where creation and creativity is possible, has become possible. There's one, and we have to be very careful. I mean, we're looking at Zaatari, which is exceptional in a way. I mean, it's representative of many places, but in the same time, it's exceptional because so much attention goes there. It's somewhat my fault to try to make that place known, to tell another story. But let's not forget, as Husam in his presentation said, there's 70 million people out there somewhere, not all of them in camps. Let's be very clear that myth of camps, most people live in communities, live somewhere. So the future is really to integrate people and have also the children have access to what the 21st century can do. And that's technologies, that's creativity, that's all the connectivity we all need and we all deserve to grow. And the children of Zaatari, as the children of Lesbos, as the children of any other place in the world should have that access.
Yeah. Just to follow on what Kilian is talking about, right now, Zaatari, it's very positive change for children there. I've seen it. About 80% of children are now going to school. and early marriage is very much has decreased. Many more girls and boys are now going to university and so forth. So there's much more opportunity for women to be starting home-based businesses. COVID, of course, has been devastating for everyone. At Zaatari, they created their own community-based strategies for helping people deal with things. Another thing that's really quite important to call out here, though, is that when we're designing missions strategies, we're very much creating a focus that are based on Syrians and Jordanians together, because we cannot work just with Syrians and ignore poor Jordanians, for example. Because there's a lot of people in Jordan, especially with the youth population, there's very high youth unemployment. There's a lot of poverty, and all of this, of course, has been exacerbated by COVID-19. So that whenever we want to work with a refugee population, we have to make sure that we're working in tandem with all of the local population, so that everybody is working together. Everybody's strengths, are being helped, increase at the same time.
Fantastic. Can we have Carla? Please, Carla, you've got an interesting questions as well, please.
Hello. Thank you for sharing this very interesting experience you gave us. I don't have any direct experience about refugees camp. I only worked in Swat Valley in Pakistan for I do my PhD on that topic, but its situation is very different. But as I know this Muslim community, so I was wondering if how many people, how many families, if were inside these caravans. I mean, how you managed to keep different families together, and about women also, do they share space with other male members of other families? Was there any problem about that you?
Karen, your experience, Karen or Keelan?
Caravan size depends on the number of people in the family. And it's a lot. The families tend to be quite large. It really depends on the point in time that you're talking about in Zaatari, because a lot of people tend to get married at a young age. So when you're married, then you may get your own caravan, or as your family increases, then you'll get an extra caravan that will be attached to the family's other caravans. So you'll kind of start creating more of like a family compound. Right, so you could have 2, 3, 4 caravans all kind of attached to each other. If it's a small family, maybe just a man with his mother, then they would have a single caravan, to themselves. So it really depends on the number of people in the family, and then how a family itself, how they choose to configure their own living arrangement. Another question here, though, has to do with sharing caravan space. And that's very much based on Muslim culture, and that you'll have gender-based between men, women, boys, and girls. People who are married and so forth. Inside the caravan, and how they divide up the space for their different activities.
Yeah, I think if I can come in here as well. Again, I think Zaatari has been teaching us it's no good to sort of prescribe of who lives where and how. And again, that drove us from a planning perspective, and following that beautiful handbook by the Lion drove us into madness in the beginning, and then basically we let people arrange themselves. And I think this is the key, understanding this. In Jordan, you have 2 camps. One is Zaatari, and the other one is Azraq. And then UNHCR chose for the second camp to make sure that this would not happen, that nobody would move houses, that nobody would actually change things, because that was considered as being chaotic. And this, with due respect to UNHCR, I think it was a major mistake to sort of succumb to the demands of the Jordanian government in this sense. So the mistakes, what was considered as a mistake of Zaatari, were not to be repeated in the model camp of Azraq. Now, if you compare the 2 camps, I mean, I haven't been there for a while, but if you compare the two camps, there's a huge difference in fact the quality of life, that respect for what people's desires are and what their perspectives could be if they have the space to develop themselves. And that again, I mean, it comes also to the previous questions. Have we learned from Zaatari? I don't think we have really learned enough. Let people design to a certain extent themselves. Just maybe on that one, we in the beginning, when people were very individualistic, they wouldn't care about communal spaces or the respect even for the street. They would dig their latrine pits in the middle of the street, and then they were complaining because the trucks couldn't pass over the streets anymore because there was a hole in there. And then saying, well, we can't deliver water if you have a hole in the street. And I said, I don't care. I have my toilet, but I want water too. So it took a long time, again, of creating these neighborhoods, creating some sense of community for people to accept. But so there is a question of when you can put in certain minimum rules again, so that people don't create something too dangerous, in fact, for the community as a whole. That's it's quite an sort of a moment which you need to craft when you actually impose. I was called a dictator at times when I said you can't do that. This is not good for the community, and I was called a dictator. You're like Bashar Assad because you're trying to tell us what to do.
Apologies, I am really conscious of the time, and I know it has been a long day for a lot of colleagues and friends, starting from early morning today at 10 o'clock. So I'm afraid we have to wrap up, although I know there are some questions, but we really need to move on. Colleagues, Katja, do you want just to say something about tomorrow program? But before, just I would like, on behalf of the Urban Design Group and colleagues in the Academy of Urbanism, to really thanks everyone, all the participants, all those who propose interesting questions, but more importantly, to Kilian and Karen, and also Margaret, for really, how can I say, sharing fantastic stories. I learned a lot from this, and apologies again for being a little bit late, although I know there are a lot of good questions. We really look forward to meeting you tomorrow as well. Please bear with us. If you check your the Academy of Urban Design, the Academy of Urbanism or Urban Design Group website, you will have, how can I say, the program for tomorrow activities, and we really look forward to meeting you all